Hello, and here we are again. This week we're going to be focusing on Chapter 2, and I'm glad to see quite a few of you have been looking at the YouTube clip. I'll try and do it justice. However, I did want to start talking about something that's no doubt very much on your mind, which is assessment. And just keep in mind over here the quizzes. I've now rearranged the Moodle site to make it a little bit easier, but the quizzes are here as well as the assessment items on the right of the Moodle site. And you can also click for a little bit more detail on that button there and get some further access. But I think most of you are, being distant students, are pretty good at getting around, probably better than I am actually, because it has been a struggle, I'll be honest. The topics, I've got a few notes there at the top of the screen, which reminding myself that I must show you a couple of things. Now, the marking criteria, which is the one I mentioned there on the right there, I am going to provide that. It isn't terribly useful to you because it doesn't state, too much that isn't obvious from the description of the topic. It just says how I'm going to allocate the total marks, how I will distribute them. Just rest assured that you need to do your best on all scores, answering the question, writing well, and as well as you can, using the theory, writing the right amount of words, referencing properly, and submitting it on time. All that type of obvious stuff is, of course, where you're going to get your marks from, and you don't want to lose easy marks for any of those points, really. I'll get to the Google Scholar in a minute, but some of you are probably already using the CQU library, which allows you full access to the PDFs, whereas Google Scholar offers only limited access. Because I'm on campus, there is a way, and you can contact the library about this, to link the campus library's access to scholarly journals through to Google Scholar. There is a way to do that. I don't know how to do it, but the library will be able to help you with that. I'll just show you some basics of what you should be looking for content for these topics. So I have to say that topic number 1 is very, very broad, but the good thing about that is that you'll have no trouble filling up your 1,500 words, because almost every chapter, not just chapter 1, is going to be appropriate for that. These chapter indicators are just indicators, so you will be able to answer elements of topic 3 with chapter 5 and 6, but indeed there's going to be a lot of content from some of the other chapters that is relevant to that. Really, if you think broadly enough, almost all aspects of OB are relevant to all aspects of OB. And the degree to which you're able to synthesize different material in that way and show the links. You will get pass marks if you focus solely on those chapters and get the 5 references that we talk about. With this undergraduate level course, we're not going to be as strict about great quality peer-reviewed articles and the usage thereof as we will be at a postgraduate level, for example. We do accept, and you probably can even find 5 books in your local library about organisational behaviour that will be relevant to your topic in some way, or elements of that textbooks will be relevant in some way, and that would be acceptable. It would certainly not get you the top marks. So let's just quickly have a look at Google Scholar, and we will close these pages and open Google Scholar. Notice how I have a link there. I'm obsessed with having shortcuts to make things go quicker. Let's see if we can get this working reasonably quickly. Internet is a bit slow, but that's something I'm sure that all of you are familiar with. Try that again. Well, we might go back to that later. While that's boiling in the background, I feel like a kitchen chef now, a television celebrity chef. Okay, so the other thing I was going to make a comment about is the textbook. Now, I am sure that all of you have bought the textbook, either a second-hand version, recent version, or brand new one, which gives you access to My Management Labs. And I really do recommend you log on to My Management Labs. It's a wonderful resource for actually embedding this material into your brain, so that when you come to exam time, you'll be able to spill it out and do a great job. But in terms of if you don't, it's not essential. I never did have anything like My Management Labs when I was studying, and I studied out of a textbook very like this. And grit your teeth and feel free to deface your textbook. You're probably going to keep it. You probably should keep it for the rest of your life. So I'd focus on, there's a lot of the textbook is these lovely stories, which are great illustrators, great for getting the concepts through to you. But I would focus on the facts and figures. Like, for example, in this area, there's a whole lot of facts about, participation rate for women and men, how participation rate for women has increased and men has fallen. That sort of stuff is material that you're going to get in the exam. And all these side definitions are key concepts. So, you can check out the learning objectives and the biographical categories, discrimination, learn the difference between discrimination and discrimination, which we'll talk about in a minute. Quite a lot of it sometimes there's another little story. It's good to read it. And similarly, here's another story about Bill and Lisa. Now, those stories will not come up in the exam. So they're not important parts. They're important for you to read them to get the idea, but then you make your own notes here in the margin about the key concepts and key facts. That's what I'd recommend you do. Or alternatively, if you don't want to deface your textbook, create a Word document and start typing material into there. It's very good practice. But you'll find with a 20-page chapter like this week that in fact it's really only 13 pages of content almost, or less, that is really hard content that you can second guess will be in an exam. Okay, let's have a look now to see whether my Google Scholar has come up, which it has not. That's really annoying. Anyway, rather than that is really annoying, and I don't understand that we haven't got access. It is connected. Try again. That's very strange. All right, just while we're waiting for this, and I have a feeling it's not going to work, the points that I want to emphasize is that when you're looking at for material, journal articles are better than textbooks. Recent journal articles are better than old journal articles. Heavily cited, so you can see that in Google. If you Google something in Google Scholar, you'll see articles there, and underneath it will be cited by 452. Now, someone who's been cited by 452, it means 452 other scholarly articles have referred to that scholarly article. So it's popular within the brainy community. So that's a good article. If it's not been cited at all, it's more suspect. So that gives you a little bit of an idea how to judge quality. In Google Scholar, there's a little triangle here when Google Scholar comes up that you can drop down and get all sorts of different refining search tools, like date, like what you can choose whether some search terms like, let's say, self-esteem and job performance are in the title of the article or in the body of the article. And a really good quality article that's bang on focused on what you want to talk about will tend to have some keywords that you want in the title. So that's worth using that option, Google Scholar, and really irritating that I can't demonstrate that to you. The internet is down. All right. If you have any further questions, that will be a bit of a coverage. I don't want to waste too much of our lecture, or spend too much of our lecture on this. Talking about workplace diversity, which we have touched on already last week and we'll touch on again. And we'll skip over the learning outcomes and get down to some of the stuff. Now notice this is the stuff that's highlighted in the margins of your textbook, surface level and deep level. Surface level is stuff that you can see. It's fairly obvious. And deep level, if you look around your workforce as a manager, you may not, unless you get to know your staff. That deep level diversity takes a little bit more digging to get at. It can include things like attitudes. I mean, you can't, on a person's face, tell me whether they like chocolate or vanilla ice cream, for example. I mean, that's a trivial example, but it gives you an idea of what we're talking about by deep. It's too deep to visually see. when we're talking about managing discrimination, you know, there's a whole lot of areas of focus which we will be talking or touching on. The textbook actually talks in different chapters about incivility in particular, harassment. This chapter I don't think it does, but you know, effectively in managing discrimination, the employer has quite a lot of legal responsibility, and there is actually an error in the textbook where it refers to the fact that there's no federal law, for example, against discriminating against people on the basis of sexual preference. That is actually a fault in the textbook, because there is, with the Fair Work Act, there is now a very broad range of discrimination that is captured by federal law. And as a manager within Australia, you need to be highly aware of the potential threat to your company from behaving in a discriminatory manner. Now, the textbook talks about older workers and, you know, some of the things that you can get out of older workers. Now, definitely, as an employer myself, I enjoyed the experience of employing people older than myself. I was quite a young manager, and I had a very large by country Queensland standards, 60, 70 staff. The vast majority of them are older than myself, particularly in the early days of the business. And you just have to swallow a bit of your pride, and you also have to just have confidence in yourself. You're paying the bills, but when you employ older people, you get for free, you get this heavy level of experience. There's mixed evidence on whether they're more productive or not. So some studies show it does, some studies shows it doesn't. They certainly leave your business less frequently, and there's a good reason for that. There's a number of reasons, but one good obvious reason is that, you know, as you get older, it's harder to get a job, because employers do discriminate against older employees. I didn't, but people do. In fact, I possibly discriminated in a positive favour towards experience. There's lower rates of avoidable absence. Again, there's mixed evidence. Where I put the question marks, it means the evidence is a little bit mixed. And you know, the government is planning to increase the retirement age to age of 70. So we're going to see a lot more older workers and issues relating to older workers in the workplace. The text refers briefly to a U-shaped curve between how long you've been in a job and how much job satisfaction. So this is an age-related issue. And it does interestingly refer to the fact that this curve is probably caused by the fact that these studies haven't discriminated properly. Notice I use the word discriminate because discriminate also means to tell the difference between blue-collar and white-collar workers. That is, you know, workers who work in relatively low-skilled professions and ones who work, you know, in high-skilled professions, so to speak. I actually have problems with that because I used to employ blue-collar workers in my printing operation who had the most incredible level of skills that I simply couldn't have matched that with all my degrees, etc. So, but you know, so I'm just using common language here. But blue-collar workers do tend to reduce in job satisfaction as they get older, probably because work gets harder. Physical type of work gets harder as you get older. Your body begins to wear out. Whereas for white-collar workers who tend to get promoted the longer they've been in a business, naturally enough get greater intrinsic job satisfaction, which we'll be talking about, I think, next week. As for female workers, we've got a similar mixed picture from the evidence. It does clearly seem to be this higher job satisfaction. That's a clear and fairly uniform result. On the absenteeism, it's true. The tendency of the results, studies show that there's more absenteeism on female workers, but it's mixed. Without a doubt, higher turnover. There's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, that women have children, and at the point where they have children, it's very difficult to continue to work all the way through that. So there is a degree to which women are forced by biological reasons to stop work, and then that causes the numbers to increase on turnover for women cycling through jobs. And the other factor is that we live in an essentially sexist society, as indeed most societies are. So when a guy moves to another country or another state or another job, the woman is normally the wife or partner normally goes with them. But if a woman moves to another job, there is no expectation that the man will move with them. It's just how it is. So these factors do cause a twist in the figures. There is a greater interest in flexible work also amongst female workers. I'll just quickly look at this clip, see whether it's... This is the Dove. Dove. Pantene. The guys are looked upon as being bosses. The girls are bossy. The guys are persuasive. And the women with the same features are called pushy. And so on. It's quite a nice ad. I'm not sure that Pantene cares that much about women except the degree to which they purchase hair product. But still a nice message. So in terms of disabilities, we'll talk about abilities in a minute. The Australian system recognises 5 main categories, which are sensory, for example, blindness or deafness, speech, intellectual, physical, psychological, and as well as a special category for head injuries. These type of people do experience trouble in getting work. So there is low performance expectations from bosses. But once they actually get work, they tend to perform very well for a little bit similar reason that older workers tend to perform well and be more reliable. And that is that they know that they cherish the job more than the rest of us because they know how hard it is to get one. So they do get very good evaluations. Particularly negative expectations, which occur before you get employed, relate from employers to people with mental disorders. They're very, very reluctant to take them on. And there's often quite a lot of subsidies around in Australia to help support their employment. Just take a guess at roughly what percent of profoundly disabled people work at least 35 hours a week, which is effectively a full-time job. If you guessed somewhere around the 5 or 25% mark, you'd be wrong, actually, because it is actually, if you have a look at this chart, 35 or more, profound is around, purple one, is around the 50% mark, which is quite pleasing, really. And surprising. I didn't expect that. But there's the value of research. So ability is the opposite side of that, and it's basically 2 categories, intellectual ability, physical ability. We'll focus first on intellectual. Now, intelligence, which is often measured by these paper-based IQ tests, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and probably had one at some stage, particularly at primary school in your life. It's broken down into a number of different kinds of intelligence, so the ability to handle words well or numbers well, and they are correlated, so high R, that's a statistical expression, so there's a high degree of correlation between these, and they all link to this hypothesized general mental ability, GMA. Inductive and deductive is stuff that relates to, let's say, Sherlock Holmes, the ability to see patterns and use them to solve problems, or the ability to use logic to deal with a problem. Now, intelligence is related to all sorts of weird things, including health and even happiness. However, it is not very associated with job satisfaction. So people who are less high IQ than others still enjoy their work and get a lot of job satisfaction out of it. Text refers to the most common IQ test used in businesses, mainly in the States. They're referring to the Wonderlic. It's just 12 minutes long, and it has questions like, assume the first 2 statements are true, is the final one true? The boy plays baseball. All baseball players wear hats. The boy wears a hat. Is that true or false? Or can we not make a decision about it? I actually had to think about this. And as a psychologist, supposedly I know my own IQ, and it is reasonably high, but I had to really think about this. And it is a time-related question. All these, everybody can answer them, almost everybody. But, for example, here we're looking at how many of the 5 people are exact duplicates, That's pattern recognition, for example. We can all do it. if we take the time. But IQ also relates to the ability to do intellectual things quickly, the speed with which you do it. That's a 12-minute test and remarkably effective at picking up all sorts of useful stuff. Now, diversity strategies to improve diversity. It's often about awareness and, you know, self-awareness, awareness of human factors, which is what this course is all about. This section of the textbook is kind of waffly, and subsequently my own antenna, I know I'm the convener of the course, but my own antenna says this is probably not going to be so heavily. You need to understand it because it's conceptual stuff, but it isn't going to appear in quizzes, for example, so easily. It would be difficult to put into a quiz. But yeah, having programs in place that are effective, and we'll talk a little more about that in a minute, and working with diversity in groups. But it's also about attracting deliberately and selecting staff that offer a diversity, and having these diversity plans in place and these affirmative action plans in place to try to recruit more women or more older people, for example, can have real benefits, and we'll talk about that also in a minute. I think we've seen that video, but effectively talks about different ages and how you need to tailor the way you handle human resource management to the different ages. Now, the contact hypothesis is a very simple hypothesis. It's you know, a lot of people who love travelling like to justify it on the grounds that I get to pick up a great tan or pick up some lovely trinkets in Bali, but they justify it on the grounds that it is, you know, it helps broaden my mind and makes me more tolerant and learn about other cultures. Effectively, that's the contact hypothesis, that spending time with people who are not of your group will improve your tolerance and your understanding. And here's a couple of studies here, one in favour, that, and by the way, that's that one, which showed that, you know, if people went to Israel, presumably this included Muslim people as well, I haven't looked at the study, but spent time there and not just did the trinkets and the highlights of Bethlehem trip, but also actually spent time with Israeli people in more genuine situations, like on the kibbutz, for example. That improved their attitudes. Whereas this study was the flip side, where Israelis went to visit Egypt, and it did not show any significant change in attitudes, possibly for the same reason that it looked at superficial form of contact as opposed to deeper level contact. Cultural intelligence. This is a lovely little paper, and I actually did a little reading on this beforehand, and, you know, effectively humans are geared with special skills to understand human stuff, you know, networking, you know, kissing ass, for example, or, you know, we'll talk about emotional labour, where, you know, you fake certain emotions. We've got certain group of cultural and social skills that are quite unique to us as an animal. This particular study pitted 2.5-year-old kids against our closest primate relatives, chimpanzees and orangutans, who are really quite smart, roughly at the same IQ, so to speak, as 2.5-year-old kids, and had a look at how they handled cognitive skills, and they found they had very similar cognitive skills, but the children had much more sophisticated cognitive skills when it came to dealing with the social world. So it's a lovely little piece of experimental evidence showing that there is something special about the human species when it comes to cultural and social issues. Now, the textbook refers to these 9 basic skills, and I'd never really thought about them that way, but it's probably worth having a crack at memorising them, or at least getting the grip of the idea that some involve strength, some involve flexibility, and some involve both of these are kind of like coordination, or ability to control the body, coordination and balance. So they're worth memorising. I won't spend too long on that because I do want to make sure that I keep this relatively brief. The textbook also, I've never seen this particular section before, but I do find it a worthwhile moment to think about. It asks whether being good looking is a skill, whether beauty, so to speak, is a skill. It's not quite as banal as saying, okay, we'll go and get ourselves plastic surgery so we can be prettier, but you do have to remember that that is almost worthwhile. I hate to advocate it, but it is true that taller people, better looking people do get jobs more easily than shorter, uglier people. And rather than invest, for example, in a boob job, one would imagine that in terms of financial return, one would get more return out of, getting a haircut and developing a better fashion sense. Because in fact, there are a number of elements to beauty that you can alter, voice and accent. As a young fellow growing up in remote area of Queensland, I used to spend a lot of time public speaking amongst the vineyards, between the grapevines as I was pruning, for example, and I developed the voice that I got partly through that, and that I do radio work now as a result, so it has been an asset for me. The ability to control body language. I said this in the lecture yesterday. I used to lecture like this, or with my hands on my hips, neither of which are a great way to get a message across. You need to learn to control that, and that's something you can learn, personal grooming. Again, on a personal note, I used to be a real scruff. As a manager, it didn't matter because I owned the business, so regardless of how scruffy, I was paying the bills and people paid attention to me. Similarly, fashion sense and know-how are things that can be to some degree learnt, I'm sure. I mean, you can learn it by rote almost, and definitely improve so in the sense that it can be learnt, it is kind of like a skill. That's the point. So some risks relating to diversity, and I love this first one here. This is a study of, I think it was Safeway, and that showed that diversity support programs, within this very large retail firm, produce no negative effects, but in fact produce some solid effects, solid positive effects, where African Americans sold significantly more. And when we talk about significant, we're talking about statistically significant. So, it's not just by chance these things happen, but that this study showed that they felt supported and subsequently improved their performance. So similarly, if you do not handle this issue right, you may get performance decrements or decreases. Companies that have less diversity support also have less engagement, that spelling is wrong there, sorry, and commitment, organisational commitment, both of which are very positive things in terms of everything from creativity through to lower turnover, for example, as in staff leaving. And women are more likely to leave companies voluntarily where there is lower diversity in their sense. So, for example, women are more likely to leave companies where there's almost all men working, for example. Now, this is a more complex and subtle point about diversity of skills versus diversity of skill levels. So that the textbook refers to some evidence showing that where you have unified groups of people who are different, but they're all quite on the same good level. So, for example, if you had a group that consisted of a rocket scientist, a brilliant designer of graphics, a very highly intelligent social person, and a driven salesperson, for example. All of them had high levels of skills. That would be a great team. They could get together and produce some wow moments. But if you have for example, a group that is ranging from the very hard-working to the lazy, you'll get some very negative effects. For example, social loafing, which I'm hoping we talk about later in the course. Social loafing is basically where groups actually perform less well than the sum of the individuals because they tend to drop to the level of the worst performing member of the group. So that's a true negative. And demographic diversity, so diversity in age and gender and that type of thing doesn't seem to make any great deal of difference. But if you're working with a group of diverse people and you want to improve performance, emphasizing one easy technique to improve that apart from good quality training and, contact hypothesis we talked about, forcing people to spend time and understanding each other. Also, perhaps even artificially emphasizing similarity is a good thing. So, understand and train the law, and the textbook itself, I hate to say it, obviously doesn't understand the Australian law quite as well, but There is a lot of legal issues, a lot of legal implications involved with diversity and discrimination. So it's something that if you're a HR person or if you're planning to be a HR person, you should at least do a basic level employment law course and understand and train on the advantages of risks, on the advantages and risks of diversity. So there are some aspects of diversity that are really worth knowing so that you can improve and get greater performance out of your company with diversity, and some areas where you need to be beware of the dangers. And don't just stand there and talk about it like I am to you, but actually model the correct behaviours, foster the correct behaviours, and show leadership. So yeah, just a bland one-shot training doesn't do much. The course shows that. Well, thank you very much. I do apologise about the Google Scholar, but any questions, please do contact me. And look at that, we've just about hit the 30 minutes, almost exactly. Talk to you next week.